The baby's cries ripped through the plane like thunder, shaking every passenger's nerves. A billionaire father sat helpless in first class, powerless against his daughter's screams, his wealth and status suddenly meaningless. Then, from the back of the plane, a poor black girl stood up and did the unthinkable. The wails pierced the cabin, relentless and sharp, like a sound no one could escape. Passengers groaned, some covering their ears, others shaking their heads in irritation. First class was supposed to be quiet, serene, an escape from chaos. But now, even here, discomfort reigned. The billionaire shifted his baby in his arms, whispering urgently, bouncing her gently, sweat already forming on his brow. He was a man accustomed to control, yet nothing he did calmed her. His power meant nothing here. Flight attendants moved quickly, masks of professionalism hiding their unease. They offered bottles, blankets, toys, but the infant only cried harder, fists balled tight, face red with exhaustion. Every second felt like an eternity. And for the man, humiliation wrapped around him tighter than the seatbelt across his waist. He could feel the judgment pressing in. In business, he inspired fear, respect, envy. But here, in this cabin, he was just another father failing in front of strangers. Far behind him, in economy, a girl sat with a small backpack beneath her feet and a notebook resting on her lap. She was 17, her braids tied back, her hoodie faded from too many washes. Her shoes were scuffed, her ticket was wrinkled, and her future was all she carried with her. This trip was more than a journey. It was hope. Hope that maybe, if she proved herself, her life could stretch beyond the narrow streets she had always known. But the crying pulled her out of her thoughts. She looked up, eyes scanning the aisle until they landed on the scene in first class. The sight stirred something inside her, a memory of her own mother holding her through endless nights of tears, of lullabies sung with a voice cracked from exhaustion yet filled with love. The girl knew that kind of struggle, the kind that had nothing to do with wealth or power, but everything to do with patience and tenderness. At first she hesitated. This wasn't her world. She was a poor black girl tucked in the back, invisible to the polished passengers sipping champagne up front. Crossing that aisle felt impossible, like stepping into a space she didn't belong. But the sound of the baby's cries pulled her forward. No one else was moving. No one else dared. Slowly, she stood, sliding her notebook into her bag, and walked toward the sound that silenced every thought but one. Maybe she could help. A flight attendant spotted her and moved to block the way, but she spoke before the woman could stop her. "Please, let me try." The billionaire looked up, his face etched with desperation. His baby squirmed violently in his arms, cheeks wet with tears. For a long moment, he said nothing, pride and disbelief battling inside him. Who was this girl? She was nobody, just a teenager in economy, barely old enough to be on her own. Yet there was something steady in her eyes, something that made him falter. Slowly, with hands that trembled despite their usual firmness, he handed her his daughter. The girl gathered the baby close to her chest, humming softly. It wasn't a grand performance, just a lullaby whispered low, steady and warm, the same one her mother once sang to her. She swayed with the rhythm of the engines, her voice threading through the noise until it was the only sound that mattered. And then, miraculously, the crying softened, from sharp wails to quiet sobs and hiccups, and finally silence. The baby's fists relaxed, her breathing even, and her tiny eyes closed. The entire cabin froze. The man's jaw slackened, his shoulders sagging in relief. Passengers craned their necks, their expressions shifting from irritation to astonishment. It was as if time itself had stopped, and everyone was holding their breath, unwilling to break the fragile magic that had settled in the air. The girl didn't smile, didn't revel in her success. She simply whispered, "Sometimes they just need to feel safe." Her words landed heavier than she intended, cutting deeper than the billionaire expected. Safe, a word he rarely thought about. His empire was built on dominance, on risk, on constant battles in boardrooms and markets. But here, his daughter had been saved by something he could never buy, something beyond his reach, compassion. He stared at the girl, studying the worn edges of her hoodie, the calm strength in her face. She wasn't here to impress him. She had no agenda, no benefit to gain. She had simply seen someone in need and stepped forward when no one else did. And for the first time in years, he felt small, not in weakness, but in humility. "Who are you?" he asked, voice rough. She looked at him, then down at the baby she now returned his arms. Just someone on her way to London. The baby remained asleep as he took her back, lighter now than she had been a moment ago, as if the girl had left behind some invisible comfort. He wanted to say more, but the words tangled in his throat. He, the man with speeches that moved investors and crushed rivals, had nothing to offer in this moment but quiet gratitude. The passengers whispered among themselves, some ashamed for their earlier scorn, others still stunned by the transformation they had witnessed. The billionaire didn't notice. He sat in silence, watching his daughter sleep, his mind circling the mystery of the girl who had stepped out of the shadows and done what he could not. When she walked back down the aisle, sliding once again into her seat, it felt like the closing of a curtain. But the man knew this wasn't an ending. It was the start of a question that would follow him far beyond this flight. What kind of girl could silence a storm with nothing but a song? And why? As he held his daughter closer, did he feel that somehow his life had just been altered by a stranger from economy class? The engines roared steady above the clouds, but inside his chest, something unfamiliar stirred, something he hadn't felt in years. For the rest of the flight, the billionaire couldn't keep his eyes from drifting back toward economy. He should have been reviewing contracts, running through figures, preparing for negotiations awaiting him in London. Normally, his mind thrived on numbers, deadlines, and the chase of a deal. But tonight, every figure blurred into the outline of that girl sitting quietly with her notebook, as if what just happened wasn't extraordinary. He kept replaying it. The way she walked down the aisle without hesitation, the calmness of her voice, the miracle silence that spread like a wave over the cabin. He had seen CEOs crumble under pressure, but never had he seen such poise from someone so young, so overlooked. When the plane landed, he lingered near the gate, watching as passengers filed out. She moved among them, her backpack slung over her shoulder, her steps steady despite the crowd. Something in him urged him to call out, to stop her before she disappeared into the chaos of Heathrow. And when she paused at baggage claim, he approached. "Wait," he said, his tone more urgent than intended. She turned, surprised to find him standing there, baby now calm in his arms, his expensive suit rumpled but his gaze direct. "Yes." "You never told me your name." Her lips curved faintly, as if it hardly mattered. "Amara." He repeated it under his breath, tasting the unfamiliar softness of it. "Amara, I owe you more than thanks. What you did up there, I've never seen anything like it." She shrugged lightly. "It was just a baby." "No," he said, shaking his head. "It wasn't just a baby. You walked into a room no one thought you belonged in, and you solved a problem no one else could. That matters." Her eyes flickered, cautious but curious. For someone used to being overlooked, the weight of his attention felt heavy. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for her." She nodded toward the baby in his arms. He almost laughed, because she was right, and because, in a world where every favor came with strings, her honesty felt sharper than any boardroom exchange. "Why London?" he asked. "I'm competing," she said. "An international math challenge. They chose a few students from my school. It's important." Her voice faltered on that last word, but he understood. Important was too small for what she really meant. This trip was hope, a future, maybe even survival. "I wish you luck," he said. And for a man who didn't believe in luck, the word surprised even him. But before he could offer more, before he could ask more, she disappeared into the crowd, swallowed by the tide of travelers. That night, in his hotel room overlooking the glittering London skyline, he rocked his daughter to sleep and thought of Amara. Her voice still lingered in his mind, calm and steady, as though it had planted something inside him that refused to fade. The next morning, Amara arrived at the competition hall, its grand arches and polished floors more intimidating than any exam she had faced. Students from across the world filled the space, many dressed in crisp uniforms, their confidence sharpened by privilege. Amara clutched her worn notebook, shoulders squared, refusing to let herself feel small. She had fought too hard to be here. The first round began, problems projected on massive screens. Time ticked mercilessly. Equations that would make most adults dizzy spilled across her page in a rhythm she knew by heart. For her, math wasn't just numbers. It was music, a story waiting to be told. When the timer ended, she sat back, breathless but certain. Judges circulated, scanning the results. Whispers spread as names were called. Amara's was among them. She had advanced. Relief flooded her chest, though she kept her face steady. In the audience, unknown to her, the billionaire sat with his daughter in his lap. He had come not out of obligation, but out of something he couldn't explain. Curiosity, maybe, or the feeling that her story had entangled with his in a way he couldn't ignore. He watched as she worked, as her focus cut through the noise around her. There was no arrogance in her, no need to show off. Only precision, only hunger. And he realized that what she had done on the plane wasn't luck. It was who she was. Someone who stepped into chaos and brought order, someone who thrived where others faltered. Round after round, Amara advanced. Each stage tougher than the last, each problem a mountain of logic and patience. And with each victory, he saw her shoulders lift higher, her steps grow surer. During a break, as she left the hall to grab a bottle of water, she froze at the sight of him waiting near the doors. His presence startled her, not just because he had found her here, but because he had chosen to. "You came," she asked. "I told you what you did mattered," he replied simply. Her eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion flickering. "Why? Why do you care?" He paused. It wasn't a question he had asked himself until now, but the answer came unvarnished. "Because people like me spend our lives thinking money solves everything. But yesterday, with all my wealth, I couldn't give my daughter peace. You did. And I realized maybe I've been blind to the kind of genius that doesn't wear a suit or sit in a boardroom." She blinked, absorbing his words. Compliments were rare in her life, and from him they carried an unfamiliar weight. But before she could reply, the call for the next round sounded, and she slipped back inside. The finals arrived sooner than she expected. The hall was electric with tension, the remaining contestants seated beneath glaring lights. The problem they were given wasn't just numbers. It was life, a disease model, complex and brutal, the kind that could change the future of medicine if understood. Amara's pencil flew across the page, her mind building structures faster than her hand could capture them. She saw patterns others missed, connections weaving like threads in a tapestry. While others faltered, she pressed on, the hum of her mother's lullaby echoing faintly in her mind. Hours later, when the time ended, she leaned back, drained but alive. Around her, students whispered, some defeated, some defiant. She folded her paper and placed it down, not knowing if it was enough, only knowing it was everything she had. In the audience, the billionaire stood, his heart hammering as if the stakes were his own. For reasons he couldn't explain, he wanted her to win. Not because she had soothed his child, not because she had humbled him, but because she carried a fire that deserved to be seen. When the judges returned with the results, the hall hushed. Names were read, awards given. And then Amara's was called. First place. The sound of applause erupted, echoing through the chamber. She rose slowly, almost disbelieving, as the medal was placed around her neck. For a moment she scanned the crowd, and when her eyes found his, she allowed herself the smallest of smiles. In that instant he knew her victory wasn't just hers. It was a reminder that genius could come from anywhere. That compassion was more powerful than money. That sometimes the future rested not in the hands of the powerful, but in the courage of those who refused to remain unseen. After the ceremony, Amara stood outside the hall, the cool London night brushing her face. The medal weighed heavily against her chest, not because it was a burden, but because it felt unreal. For years she had been told she was too poor, too quiet, too invisible. Now, the world had applauded her name. She expected the night to end in silence, to walk back alone to the small hostel where her school group was staying. But as she stepped toward the street, she found the billionaire waiting, his daughter bundled in a soft blanket against the chill. "You did it," he said simply. Amara glanced at him, uncertain how to receive praise from a man whose life was a universe away from hers. "I guess I did." He studied her carefully, then said something unexpected. "What's next for you?" The question hit her harder than the applause. What was next? After this competition, she would return home, back to crowded classrooms, back to evenings lit by a flickering bulb when the power stayed on long enough, back to wondering if dreams could survive where hunger and bills pressed harder than ambition. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've always known what I wanted, but wanting and having are different things." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the muffled sounds of the city. Then he spoke again. What if they weren't? Her eyes flickered to his, wary. She knew the dangers of promises, especially from men who had power. But something about his expression was different. Not pity, not arrogance. Something closer to recognition. "You're too young to carry the weight you do," he continued. "But you carry it anyway. And I respect that. I'd like to help you. With school, with opportunities. Not charity, an investment. Because I believe what you can do with your mind matters." The word investment settled differently in her ears. He wasn't offering her a gift she didn't earn. He was acknowledging her worth, placing her in the same category as the companies he funded, the ideas he nurtured. Still, hesitation lingered. "Why me?" she asked quietly. He glanced down at his daughter, now asleep, her face peaceful for the first time in days. "Because when she cried, I had everything money could buy and it meant nothing. And then you came, with nothing but yourself, and you gave her peace. That's more valuable than anything I've ever bought." The sincerity in his voice disarmed her. She looked away, unsure if her heart could hold the sudden weight of hope. Over the next few days, their paths crossed again and again. He attended the closing events, sometimes sitting quietly at the back, sometimes exchanging a few words with her between sessions. There was no grand announcement, no show of power, only presence, only attention. When her group prepared to leave, he asked if she would allow him to stay in touch. She nodded slowly, giving him the carefully folded slip of paper with her mother's phone number. Back home, life returned to its usual rhythm, but something was different. Calls began arriving. Opportunities appeared. Scholarships, mentorships, doors that had long seemed sealed shut. She knew they weren't magic. They were the result of someone who had seen her, truly seen her, and decided her brilliance was worth amplifying. At first, her classmates whispered. Some dismissed her win as luck. Others envied her sudden visibility. But Amara didn't waste time proving herself to them. She had bigger horizons to reach. She poured herself into her studies with even fiercer determination, carrying the memory of London not as a finish line, but as a beginning. Months later, she received an envelope with an embossed seal. Her hands trembled as she opened it. She had been offered admission to one of the world's most prestigious universities, on a full scholarship. That evening, she walked to the rooftop of her modest home, the metal cool against her neck, the letter clutched in her hand. The city stretched around her, both harsh and beautiful. She thought of her mother, who had sacrificed everything to keep her in school. She thought of her classmates who would never see beyond the walls of their neighborhood. And she thought of the billionaire, whose daughter had been soothed not by wealth, but by a song whispered by a girl no one expected to matter. In another part of the world, he sat in his office overlooking a skyline of glass towers, his phone buzzing with numbers and deals. But when he looked at the photo on his desk, his daughter asleep in Amara's arms on that flight, he remembered what truly mattered. Their lives remained different, divided by worlds of wealth and circumstance. Yet, somehow, they were bound by a single night on an airplane, when a baby cried and a girl with nothing gave everything. Years later, at a university lecture hall filled with young minds, Amara stood at the podium. She spoke of numbers, of logic, of the beauty of seeing patterns where others saw only confusion. And as she ended her speech, she glanced at the audience, where a man with graying hair sat with his daughter, now grown, applauded with the same quiet pride he had shown that night in London. Amara smiled, not for the applause, not for the recognition, but because she knew the truth. Greatness isn't born in privilege. It's born in moments of courage, in a decision to step forward when no one else will. The world had once dismissed her as invisible, but on a flight across the ocean, she had rewritten her story. And in doing so, she had reminded even the powerful that humanity, at its core, belongs to everyone. And the sound of that baby's silence, on that unforgettable night, was where it all began.